Well, welcome everyone to the Wilson Science and Technology Forum on the day after Thanksgiving in 2025. I think today we Americans have a lot to be thankful for, but we also have even more, I think, to be concerned about in terms of the
Oh,
direction of this nation. Uh, Big tech and science and technology are part of the concern that I have. And so, as we approach the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence and the founding of the United States on July 4th, 1776, the purpose and evolution of government, which is the subject of our conversation today, uh, that framework began with the ratification of the Constitution in 1778. And I think it has never been more important in our social fabric today to have an understanding of how all of this evolved, given the challenging times in which we live. This is not only true of science and technology and big tech, it's true of virtually every aspect of life in America today. And so I think we should be very happy and thankful, Vincent, that you, as the historian of the Wilson Science and Technology Forum, are available today to lead us through a conversation on the purposes, and evolution of government. I want to welcome you, Vincent, and everyone else who's online. Vincent and Emily Ann are going to lead the conversation. So, Vincent, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ron, and thank you for everyone who has shown up. It's not just Black Friday, but it's also since there are still many leftovers and other aspects, we're talking about it being, and I've always called it Thanksgiving Friday. This topic came about in part from some of the side discussions about artificial intelligence. I only have one screen near the end about it, but part of it is thinking about this whole attitude towards government and what's going on. And of course, history is both past and the present. And though there is a future and we speculate about it, we do need to make our own histories. This evaluates the many challenges, and towards the end, we take a special look at Frances Perkins, who was actually the author of the New Deal, not well known by many, though she's coming back into her own in terms of her historic role. Next. Next.
oh, hold on.
Yeah,
Okay. Hang on a second here.
yeah, take your time.
Okay. Thanksgiving Friday, as I was saying. Thank you to everyone who has shown up and those who will see this on-demand version. The purposes of government are much debated. The actions of government certainly prove to be purposes, whether they're intended by everybody or not. And one of them is, in fact, holidays. How a society recognizes past events or current opportunities. There are secular holidays such as Independence Day, July 4th in the United States, or Canada's Dominion Day. There are religious holidays, Christmas, Easter, Hanukkah, Eid, Diwali, and others. And government proves to be kind of a traffic cop for observances. Are there enough people who want to observe these holidays, even though public schools, are secular? Do we say this is enough people observing it that we won't require people to do public duty in terms of various things on different days? So that's an interesting kind of, I think, segue to the broader fact that government does many things, some of which are welcome, some of which are not. The secular observance of Thanksgiving and Christmas actually is a more recent activity. Religious groups have observed these days, and in New England we take these for granted. But after the Civil War, when Ulysses Grant became president, he was looking for ways to reunite Americans across a broad spectrum, and he thought that general observance of Thanksgiving and Christmas would help that. And so he ordered Thanksgiving and Christmas in the District of Columbia and strongly encouraged it across the nation and really had a significant role in Thanksgiving and Christmas being American holidays the way we take them today. Veterans Day is another example of a secular observance for a worthy occasion that was originally Armistice Day at the end of World War I. President Eisenhower and others agreed to expand it to all veterans who served. There are philosophical holidays by the federal government, perhaps, and various people. The Martin Luther King holiday in many states in the South, white groups thought that the lost cause was still to be honored. Robert E. Lee holiday. There are municipal observances of various kinds. There are cultural holidays, Mother's Day, Father's Day, Grandparents' Day, others, different groups advocate for them, get them passed or lose status. It's a kind of a quilt work of holidays across the United States. And remember, it is 50 states plus other uh, parts of the United States, like Guam or Puerto Rico, that have their own observances as well. Next. This is kind of a pilot for an adult civics general audience overview and or book. For many years, civics was not either in the schools or the public schools or required. Some of the private prep schools recognized in recent years that history was now longer. General teaching of American history was started in the late 1800s when there was only a century as the United States. Many private schools in recent years now require 2 years of American history, recognizing the last century has been surely as complex and as important with technology and sociology, and a lot of public schools aren't there yet. Next. At the end of this modest analysis, I welcome discussion and ideas about these various topics. Next. For many years, civics was not taught, but there's also, go back, please,
Oh,
go back.
it only goes in one direction.
Okay, so it doesn't go back at all.
Let's see what happens.
There you go.
Okay, okay, here we go. Okay, going
Sorry.
forward. Yep. Okay. Civics is being reintroduced. Part of our problem, I think, is that for about 30 to 40 years, civics was not required, in many cases not even present in the public schools. And this is an attempt, this presentation is an effort to provide a broader audience work that would, in a broader sense, give people an opportunity to think about and be informed about the mechanisms, if you will, the levers that provide government. Next. This is a quote of Francis Perkins, who we'll talk about a little bit more towards the end of the presentation. But it's a, I think, very instructive quote. The people are what matter to government, and a government should aim to give all the people under its jurisdiction the best possible life. How do we do that? Next. How do we do what Francis Perkins at least so nobly advocated? Well, we certainly do provide government services. We encourage public-private partnerships. We encourage private inspirations, such as the Special Olympics. The Kennedy family had one of their siblings who had various physical and mental problems, and that inspired them to think about Olympic style activities for people who are handicapped, and now it's actually there's a Special Olympics internationally as well, and it's provided many individuals with an opportunity to shine or feel a little more normal. I had the opportunity to know a young fellow that I represented as an educational specialist, and he had won a few medals, and he and his mother persuaded him that if he stopped smoking, he could do better. And he stopped smoking because he wanted to get more medals in Special Olympics. Interesting example of positive modeling. And of course, more generally, we should publicize public information that sometimes seems either obscure or neglected by the government agencies that produce it for their own purposes. Next. There is a slippery slope that we are experiencing today. There are many philosophies of government, of society, of life, and there are ideologies. And though they sometimes blur in terms of their distinctions, they are not the same. Philosophies tend to have a range of possible views and some type of broad-ranging debate. Ideologies tend to stipulate particular views. For instance, the Bolshevik Communist Soviet Union that stipulated who were your friends and who were your enemies. Racism itself, which stipulates what you are based on what you're born as. There are certainly other ideologies that societies always face and respond in different ways. Next. Plato's The Republic, of course, is a foundational aspect of our society. A great deal of what we have informed the early founders of our nation. It is partly Greek, partly Roman. The classical pillars we see in classic buildings of Greek and Roman revival. And Plato was, in fact, a foundational thinker of the Western philosophical tradition. And we know that he was taught by Socrates and taught Aristotle. So he was kind of, think about that sequence of three generations. Next. Horace Mann, you say, wait a second, this is a white Anglo in the middle of this presentation, and we're talking classics. Well, Horace Mann is kind of our great thinker, the father of the common school, born in Massachusetts, mediocre education. For a number of years, he said, as he was growing up, he only had about 6 weeks of schooling per year. Yet he wound up at Brown University and in 3 years graduated as valedictorian, went on to be a lawyer and a senator, and he is the greatest figure, perhaps, in transforming American education. Improving public schools became his life's work and the common school movement, and I think this is a great quote of his: education is the only political safety. Outside of this arc, all is deluge. And certainly the social media has proven that in some ways. Next. He inspired the general adoption of normal schools to train professional teachers, an important part of what was called the Common School movement, which came to be associated largely with the Whig Party that was seeking a national culture. And you may have seen along the way numerous schools that are named for Horace Mann because he was such a significant figure. Next. This statue, in fact, shows you how significant. On the grounds of the Massachusetts State House, in front of it is a statue to a great educator in a place of honor. This statue, designed by an early pioneer in sculpture among women, Emma Stebbins, local, and it was unveiled on July 4th of 1865, and that kind of suggests the importance of it. There are other political figures and a Civil War general there nearby. I don't know of too many public figures of education that have such a remarkable statue and a remarkable place of honor. Next. This is a book, a children's biography of Horace Mann, another example that he was an active figure in many areas, state representative, elected to the state senate, and quickly cycled out, utilizing those connections, and president of the Massachusetts State Senate to help create a Mass Board of Education. He was the first secretary, the leader of it for a dozen years, and he actively recruited women to be professional teachers. Very significant part of teaching are women teachers. Think about this in the early to mid 1800s. We have many governing structures, and when we think about it, in our society at least, most of these have electoral systems, constitutions, bylaws, charters that specify how these organizations will work. And even when they're narrow, they are often subject to amendment or adoption or change. And a lot of people don't realize that and don't always realize how this mentality comes. Next. There are, of course, international organizations, and the United States has had much to do with that. Remember, it's the United States of America, and as the 13 colonies figured out how to work together, originally with the Articles of Confederation, each of these states really were separate countries and to some extent still are, which is why you have a governor, a legislature, and different systems of law for each of the 50 states and some of our other affiliates like Puerto Rico and Guam. In fact, in the last 10 years or so, the newest part of the United States, not a state but an affiliate, is the Commonwealth of the Mariana Islands, about 1,000 miles from Japan, way out there. They're not a state. They probably don't have enough people to ever become one, but they now have been permitted to create a set of laws that are autonomous for themselves within the broad umbrella of the United States. The European Union was largely successful as people began to understand a United States of Europe. And certainly it's a lot better that the French and the Germans make money off of each other and tourist with each other than being at war with each other. And these are actually successes of the American Federation, our federal government, the World Health Organization in a different way, with a medical federation, the United Nations in a perhaps less perfect way, and these are some of the arguments and struggles we're hearing about. Should we have these groups? Should we be part of them? Or what should they do or not do? Next. An earlier figure that is actually lesser known to many but very significant is a man who took the name of Faustus Socinus. This is a slightly Latinized version of an Italian name. This man, born in Siena, Italy, passed away in Poland, and he, with an uncle, was a co-founder of what is called Socinianism, developed by a group called the Polish Brethren. They were more obscure to many, but they directly lead into the Unitarian views, and this thinking finds its way into the thinking of John Adams. Next. When we think about the purposes of government, there's a series of sequences that are kind of interesting. Our infrastructure has developed over time with what was the natural environment here, and some information from Native American peoples. Gradually, physical infrastructure came to be created: canals, roads, railroads, aeronautics, and space travel. And they've all had very similar sequences of development. Government uses, particularly military, often involved in the early phases. Government expenditures involved, toll charges, well, way of getting financing through government or through private users. In fact, many of the roads, if you come along a road here in eastern Massachusetts and you see a straight road for 2 miles, and you might see a name somewhere that says toll road or something, that was probably one of what were at one point perhaps 200 to 300 toll roads in eastern Massachusetts, where in fact a family would develop a business of creating a straight road that would be clean and safe to travel in even difficult weather. Eventually, these toll roads failed or were sold to the government or made public roads. Private user financing was, of course, those people who use it today. Still, the Mass Turnpike does that. Only the people who use that road actually pay for it. And then eventually private market entrepreneurs in different ways. And that's happened with all of these today. Space travel, now originally a government and military expenditure, has become now a private business. Next. Statues are part of our culture too, a combination of government decisions, popular will, other mentalities, literally men on horseback. The first one of real significance, Paul Revere, celebrated for his short suburban ride for which he was briefly caught by the British and failed. actually his many rides. I have been doing some reading. It turns out that Paul Revere rode at least 18 times on official business, mostly compensated. His longest ride was to Philadelphia with the Suffolk Resolves, that were the independents of Massachusetts identified from September of 1774. The other colonies weren't there yet, but they, in September of 1774, endorsed what Massachusetts had done. Of course, George Washington, Joseph Hooker on the side of our State House, a man on horseback as well, generals and other public figures now in recent years, as people say, well, can't we be a little bit more complete or broader about these issues? Then people now have started to do statues of women and other figures. Quincy has been in the lead on that. We'll touch on that briefly again. There's a statue of several women on the Commonwealth Avenue Mall and others as well. As a historian, I should remember that there's a statue of a historian, Samuel Eliot Morison, on the Commonwealth Avenue Mall as well, a man of some significance in depicting the history of World War II, accessing naval records, and a lot else. Next. Frederick Law Olmsted addresses what, in fact, was not just what we take as a pleasant environmental reality, but he thought of landscape architecture as more than that. Born in Hartford, Connecticut, passed away in Belmont, Mass. His National Historic Site in Brookline is now open to the public and worth stopping at. Um, he was certainly the famous designer of Central Park and what we more broadly know as the Emerald Necklace, but hundreds of projects throughout the United States, Canada, and others. It goes back to what was called the Wild Movement in England, where the idea was to make landscape plantings that looked more like natural plantings. But very important part of what he thought of in doing this was democratic landscaping, that parks and recreation would be available to all, whether rich or poor or in between, that they could escape their tenements or their houses or just go out and enjoy nature in a different way. And again, a purpose of government that may be debated or debatable, but very much as part of a purpose of government in our kind of a society. Next. This is moi. Um, for about 20 years, I did tours around Harvard Square and Cambridge and sometimes in Boston. I was homeschooled by my parents from kindergarten through high school, earned my associate and bachelor's with honors from Harvard Extension School, my master's from the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I also took some educational history, and I did some additional work at Harvard Law School and Radcliffe Institute. Next. This is myself with Emily Ann Kernline, my partner and assistant on these projects. She does a lot of the graphics, and I do a lot of the research, reading, and thinking. And together, somebody called us a power couple, and we said, "Who?" In any case, this was at the opening of the Peabody Essex Museum, the newer wing up in Salem. It's well worth taking in if you're looking for a day trip into Salem. Next. What is government? What are the definitions? What is the active discussion we're having? And government is not necessarily politics. And there was a point many years ago where at times people said government is serving a legal structure, not just arguing about whose side you're on. And this is an important part, perhaps, of trying to recover the distinction between government and politics. This presentation is exploring these concepts and its definitions, but ultimately coming back to these issues: who decides these definitions? Why are these definitions there? Is it based on economic interests? Is it based on cultural definitions? Do you come from another country that brings something to the table or lessons from what people have escaped? My father used to say the people who came to the United States from other places are people who said, I don't like it around here. I'm going to get up and move my butt to a place where I can say or do what I want. And that's why America, to some extent, has the tumultuous arguments, and as long as we have those arguments, we're in better shape. If we lose that, we do have problems. And are these definitions fixed? Are they changeable? Are they dynamic? And how is that to be? Next. The philosophy of education does intersect here. Literacy is at risk in the urban school districts, particularly where reading, writing, and recognition are important aspects that in many cases students have been behind for a long time, and the pandemic simply made it worse. Reading is certainly clear. Writing is clear. A lot of people sometimes don't think about recognition. The color charts. What is red? What is green? Can you see it on a traffic light? Do you read signs? Should those signs be in a particular language or a range of them? There are physical skills, using tools, our vocational schools, auto repair, electrician skills, plumbing skills. We need all of those things. And those are things in our marketplace that can change or adjust. But how do we do that? And do we think about that? Many different aspects. And there are many public views. Dewey was one of many educational consultants. In more recent years, Montessori has grown. When I was growing up, part of my homeschooling was in the Montessori method, which was forbidden in the public schools. Today it is welcomed. And of course, throughout American history, where do you learn? Well, most people learn at first at home from their parents or their home environment. Over the years, schools have grown. They've grown their plant, they've grown their athletic facilities, and libraries, of course, have been important. At one point, libraries were paid institutions. You had to pay to be a member. The free library movement was quite radical. And in fact, it's interesting to note that Horace Mann actually spent a lot of time in Franklin, Massachusetts, in the public library. And the public library was apparently the first free public library in Massachusetts. Seems like more than a coincidence that the great pioneer of public education went to a free library in his town. And as he was thinking about this and talking about education, wait a second, teaching. Oh, well, what are we going to teach? And who trains the teachers? Next. Merriam-Webster actually is an example of our culture and its differences. These are some definitions. There are a number of definitions, but I chose the ones that I thought were, in fact, most central. The organization, machinery, or agency through which a political unit exercises authority and performs functions, and which is usually classified according to the distribution of power within it, the factions, if you will. The complex of political institutions, laws, and customs through which the function of governing is carried out. We might think of uh, civil servants and the civil service law as part of that, which is more generally and more specifically tried to separate politics, the Hatch Act at the federal level, which is being weakened, the particular system for or character of the governing authority of a political unit. And for example, a method that is frequently used here, which is a democratic representative government. In some towns, town meetings are open town meetings where everyone comes. There are variations. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary. Next. Important to recognize also that in the U.S., the Merriam-Webster Dictionary is a free market dictionary. American Heritage has one. There are others. These are not government definitions, not a Ministry of Culture. We don't have one. It's up to the marketplace or people's tastes or enthusiasm for classical music or rock music or pop music or jazz. The dictionary is based on actual usage. It's dynamically flexible. It changes quite flexibly. The meanings change, can be added, can alter other meanings as well. And that's important because it is not a government-driven mechanism. It's in fact a society-driven mechanism based on reality, usage, and those people who seek to influence that. Next. A little reminder about different laws. In fact, church law underlies quite a bit of Western culture, but over time separated. So a canon in Greek is a rule, have tended to be church rules. Legislative measures by the state in Latin legis as a law, and separate paths gradually developed through the struggles of the Reformation and others as well. Church discipline and state laws gradually separated. They may still interact with each other as nonprofit laws and other tax statuses exist or are defined, but important aspect of our society has been the separation. Part of the challenges of today are people who seek to bring in different religious values in different ways. Next. Hammurabi is a figure back in history, an Amorite king in BC around 1792 to 1750. Next. And his legal code is really the first one that is known as an extensive and relatively comprehensive one, though there were earlier collections of laws, all said to be given by a god of some type. And this is a code that Hammurabi said was given to him. He developed certainly part of it, and it is concerned largely with law and justice. And it includes criminal, family, property, and commercial law, though with in cuneiform writing that has been deciphered over the years. Just using dating, some people sometimes are a little confused. BCE is before the Christian era. BC was more commonly used. In this presentation, uses BC without intent of discrimination or direct referencing of our great local university. Next. The Napoleonic Code is another reference point that's used in the world, established in 1884. It was helped to be created and encouraged by Napoleon Bonaparte himself, who convened experts across many areas. Though he had a dictatorial flavor to him, he also did appreciate education and experts. And this civil code is an example of that has certainly influenced the French Commonwealth. There is a British Commonwealth, the lesser known. There's a French Commonwealth that has perhaps 25 nations. Interesting how important the French culture is, that even the Vietnamese communist regime applied to and was eventually admitted to the French Commonwealth because of the French culture that they had, even though they're more totalitarian than some of the other French influenced former colonies. Next. The challenges of our time include a journey of justice. How do you define justice? Is it punitive? Is it encouraging? Is it a hybrid? What are the journeys of justice of each of us over time? And the battles over diversity and equity and inclusion are central to that. The different views of what justice is. Is it justice taken as a punishment? Is it justice taken as a widening of opportunity or encouragement? What is the mix? These are real battles, and thinking about them in a structural way as well as in a cultural way is important. And it points to the fragility of economic and legal systems. There are many patterns sweeping the world. Next. The different patterns, I think, can easily be identified, though their variations make it really kind of confusing at times. There's a neo-populism, certainly, we see here in the United States, we see in Europe, we see in different places, and it has various dramatic cultural pushbacks. I've seen enough change, I've had enough, I'm pushing back, or I don't like what government is doing, or it costs me too much. Various views with various enthusiasms and angers. Climate change is a hybrid. There are those from science, there are environmentalists, there are green parties and responses to weather events, and this is a shifting, really set of targets because economics gets involved. The human rights challenges, there's a wide variety across the world, and as women insist on their rights, and they are certainly a majority of populations, the disability, those advocating for various social groups, These are a different set of challenges. So I think there really are four sets of patterns that we see, and the shifting coalitions of nations based on various governmental power groups, those with military coups, those East-West democratic versus totalitarian approaches, the North-South economic clashes, and battles over immigration. Next. The coalitions do include many, but perhaps the best known is NATO, which has certainly kept the peace in Western Europe for 3 or 4 generations. And as I point out, people have been able to see their children grow up and maybe their grandchildren and to plan for a future as opposed to bringing a child up who goes off to war and dies or kills. NATO has been a success in that way. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization is a little darker for some of us. It is an alliance of a kind between the Russian system, the Red Chinese system, and other countries. It tends to be a somewhat militaristic and totalitarian culture, and it is not to be ignored because, in fact, Russian and People's Liberation Army military units have trained together occasionally with militaries of other countries as well, and it's gradually proving to be a bit of a uh, facing off alliance of NATO versus the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Another group that has really an interesting mix, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, and there are certainly other groups as well, lesser known, perhaps less effective, but the first one ever known was the Pan American Union, which became the Organization of American States. In recent years, kind of weak, but it was an early pioneer. Next. Going back and thinking about how groups have evolved over time, there were the tribal constructs, the chief, the system, the elders of the tribe, gradually developed into some variants of divine right of kings, claiming various religious authorities or religious presences. Gradually, some people, even the nobles, thought that this was a problem, and in 1215 the Magna Carta came about, in part because the nobles thought they were not being treated very well, and they basically said, King John, you may not remain king if you don't give us some rights. Other people thought that was pretty good. It was written down, the Magna Carta, that really underlies American law in significant ways and evolved further in many ways. Various democracies have developed with readings from Greece and Rome, various democracies, various republics. As the perhaps the most significant political party in American history was the Democratic Republican Party, which traces to both major parties, the democracy of those who were recognized as having the right to vote or having property. The Republic restraints that I have a minority right against your majority or vice versa. Parliamentary systems in many countries and presidential systems, which in the case of France have come to be somewhat hybridized, where they have both a strong president and a strong parliament. And there are various economic systems, and people often don't think about the various economic systems. Next. Mass Civic Literacy Coalition is important to this because they have brought back civic learning in the schools. The first week of March every year is an opportunity to discuss, to have programs about civics. Next. And Massachusetts has a wide range of programming that continues to evolve. Next. It's for a state here to begin to add back civics, and there are various very specific curriculum requirements, and it includes in our high schools and elementary programs student-led civics projects. This is an evolving movement that is gradually adding more curriculum, and eventually many of us think will and perhaps hope have a broader area. This work that I'm doing here is to perhaps bring the adult world back to knowing this so that people aren't saying, oh, it's just your opinion or mine, but in fact, the levers and mechanisms of government as we're looking at it next. Communications in the United States has tended to be chaotic, confused, and innovative. Postal services, the Pony Express, letters, packages, gradually publications, radio, TV, internet, and others, the U.S. Postal Service. All of these, in fact, in many other countries and nations, are run by the government directly. Um, in the United States, they tend to be started with some government assistance and then become private, and are very important to the question of quality and censorship next. How do you control communications? There's a certain level of tasteful regulation one wants to have to make sure that these are not being misused in terms of damage to individuals, fraud, scams of various kinds. But what is censorship and what is defined as censorship? And of course, the misuses of slanted information, which we generally recognize what propaganda is not just what you shouldn't say, but the pressure by various economic and other political interests that we see really rampant today, what you will say because we require you to say it. Next. Electronic communication surely has to control, as we've talked about earlier in the discussion, hackers and attacks and phishing and other kinds of mechanisms, but you don't want to take that too far into monitoring what everyone else is doing. The economic systems that we touch on are important. People tend to be a little bit confused about that and not always understanding. Those who take economics know a certain amount. A lot of people don't. Marx and the socialists have a labor theory of value. Little known to many is what is important to our property tax laws and zoning, and that is the land theory of value. A fellow named Henry George ran for mayor of New York City, got a lot of votes and didn't win, but he wound up writing a large book about the land theory of value, and quite a bit of that has wound up in our zoning laws. If you look at your property tax, you see the school tax, and you'll see the general tax, and you see land assessment values, and it has both good and negative aspects when it comes to housing. We have, of course, the capital theory of value, and there's others that mix, so the United States has a hybrid, a little bit of state capitalism left over from World War II, fascism that is coming in because some people think the government and corporations might work together or will be required to work together. I'll leave further comment to others on that. But these are economic systems people need to be aware of as part of a mix. Many countries choose one or other of these. We tend to have a little bit of each in kind of an unregulated buffet. Next. Regulation comes in a society, particularly when you have complex realities. We have a vast array of weather across the United States and local conditions, and a huge population. When I was growing up, there were maybe 180 million people in the United States. Today, maybe 330 million. We've nearly doubled in population, the doubling larger than the population of many countries and nations in the world. You can't necessarily rely just physically. If Congress met, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, they couldn't possibly have legislation for every situation. And so gradually regulatory agencies have developed to create a mix of popular and public interest and technical knowledge. The National Transportation Safety Board, the Federal Aviation Administration, in fact, all of us who travel. Federal Communications Commission regulates a certain amount of what we hear or see on radio and TV. The Federal Trade Commission seeks to regulate honest business. Interstate Commerce Commission across state lines, and there are many others. There's a lesser known document that is worth referencing or being aware of. It's called the Federal Register. It's a legal report. Next. It is the official journal of the federal government of the United States. Every day, it's a weekday, except federal holidays, it is published. And whether it is an executive order, kind of a presidential decree, the legislation passed by Congress, other actions by regulatory agencies, when it's published in the Federal Register, it becomes part of the legal system, eventually codified in the Code of Federal Regulations. Next. Federal Register is compiled by a particular office, the National Archives and Records Administration, and there are no copyright restrictions if it appears there, whether it's a presidential action or a law passed or a regulation, it becomes part of our public law and it is part of the public domain, and it's a good resource to know of. And it's also something that's obscure to many people because there's a regulatory process that's important if we're trying to be on the up and up and transparent. Next. Regulatory procedures usually have a series of steps of proposed regulations, rulemaking it's called, usually public hearings, a period of public comment, and final regulations. And there's supposed to be changes in regulation by a similar process. And part of the argument that is being battled across federal and state courts is whether these procedures either are being followed or the boards and commissioners and appointees of them are allowed to do their job or are substituted or removed with or without benefit of law or regulation. And that's where the chaos of our present legal, judicial, and regulatory system is coming about in ways that even those who believe in a more narrow interpretation of the law are becoming somewhat concerned. Next. Many systems of law, and they develop, and you can always go backwards as well as forwards. Of course, traditional anecdotal happened in many tribal systems where, what did my uncle say and what did my grandfather say, and do we follow that culture? Precedent-based developed from that. Eventually, what the British call constitutional is not a written constitution, but the precedents of history that are honored. The Magna Carta certainly is honored. Many other documents that then, in the American experience, now copied in many other places, are actual constitutional documents. The statutes that are authorized are limited by that, and the various regulatory procedures we've talked about next.
Hmm.
The styles of government intersect with this in another way. How do you feel about government is kind of, I think, what the styles of government are. The consent of the governed. Do we consent or not? The religious or theocratic voices that say, well, this is what we think should be done based on our religious beliefs. There are tendencies to personal dictatorship and cults of personality in the United States, on top of which are plutocratic or economic cult aspects and self-perpetuating elites and oligarchy. These are various styles of government that intersect with the chaos we have today. The purposes and evolution of government are being debated, and it's worth looking at today's challenges, prior examples of such debates in the 1700s, in the 1800s, in the 1900s. Financial and economic mechanisms, do we need to adjust them, improve them, change them? Fiscal infrastructure. Well, Congressman Moulton actually was involved in trying to develop a possible high-speed rail in California and across Texas. Another example of somebody who eventually wound up in the political structure just a little bit more, partly because he was a transportation advocate. Next. Public purposes we've talked about, physical infrastructure, this is kind of a review, public and private comprehensive education. And by the way, do you feel your public school is doing well? Or do you want something different for your student? And then you have private, parochial, and other schools. You have safety issues. Are there going to be traffic lights? What are the speed limits? We've talked about the social networks. Economic growth is necessary in a growing society, and there needs to be revenue creation. And how do we define that? What are the limits? What are the opportunities for it? And who should pay the revenue that's going to come in to accomplish public purposes? The first normal school I mentioned, literally a couple hundred yards from where the first shots were fired against the British troops, was the first normal school. Next, this is if you are in Lexington, you look off to the northeast corner. By the way, go back one, please. This school actually, with Horace Mann's encouragement, first enrolled 3 women. Ultimately, a class of 15 women were the first students to be trained as teachers here in Massachusetts. Eventually, this program grew and eventually became the predecessor of Framingham State College, which operates to this day. Financial fabric, economic anthropology teaches us that you start with barter after you produce and want something else. Currency systems are under challenge today, yet again. Hard currency, copper, silver, gold, and paper currency, and now crypto. And there are more. And crypto must be here to stay if the Fed is considering what kind of federal crypto there might be and how that might work. The philosophies of government start with Aristotle and Plato. John Locke, John Adams, and John Quincy Adams are our local interpreters and translators. Next. Aristotle, we know, the great Greek. I did ask, did he eat his moussaka? Next. John Locke was a physician, an inspiring figure. His two treatises on government, read by John Adams and others, and much of the credit of what he's done has translated through other people as well. Next. John Adams was very significant here, not just being a lawyer and on the side of independence, but he authored the Massachusetts Constitution, a model for the U.S. Constitution, and many others. And it's important because he actually read vast amounts of the great thinkers, which informed what he did. Went on to be president in an undistinguished role. What he had done before and after as president was more important. Next. John Quincy Adams, his son, who became president as well. First president with a photo. This is a daguerreotype, actually, a little side bit of trivia. He was a major abolitionist and helped to transform our law and our sense of struggle over slavery. Perhaps one of the most significant, though his role is sometimes eclipsed by that of William Lloyd Garrison and others. There will be actually an Adams Presidential Center, not exactly a presidential library, but pretty close to it, that is being developed in Quincy that will honor John and John Quincy Adams and their first ladies, who were among the most significant people in transforming those roles. The various levels of government that we can recognize include our neighborhoods, often with neighborhood councils, the precincts of electoral districts, the municipalities, cities and towns and how they govern and what their basic documents are, counties which are stronger outside New England, the various states, countries, and nations, and many nations like our own are assemblages of separate countries, the Massachusetts country, the Texas country, the California country, with distinct autonomies but not full independence. In reform, there are instincts for change, there are instincts for tradition, there are instincts for improvement, and ultimately, what are the actual instincts for actual reform as opposed to simply lip service or trying to make some small adjustments without changing the whole structure? Frances Perkins is an example of an individual who is driven for reform, born in Boston. She became the first woman in the U.S. cabinet. She served the entire 12 years in most of the Franklin D. Roosevelt administration and a pioneer in many ways. Notice you see Frances Perkins, and the smaller print underneath says architect of the New Deal. She was the one who designed the New Deal that FDR and his political backers pushed for, but she was the designer of much of this. Next. She's credited with, among other many initiatives, the Civilian Conservation Corps that put many young men to work at the time of the Depression, the Social Security Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act, and numerous other initiatives. She was a successful apostle of social progress because she thought people should be treated with respect and have the opportunity for progress. Next. Popular will, we have reform formations, reform movements, reform accomplishments, and how do we define those is important as well. Next. Her knowledge, Frances Perkins' knowledge, came from being on the board of the Church Pension Fund of the Episcopal Church of the United States. She knew about pensions. She was born in Boston, passed away at the age of 85 in New York. Next. The quote from the beginning of this presentation: the people are what matter to government, and the government should aim to give all the people under its jurisdiction the best possible life. She is a saint now, a solemnity also in the Episcopal Church calendar. This is a presentation of the icon by her grandson to an Episcopal church, I believe, in Maine. Artificial intelligence certainly is something we've talked about that led to part of this discursion, if you will, on government and its purposes. We recognize the need for guardrails, for human checking, for human oversight, for recognition of the use of AI as a tool, recognition of present limitations. My suggestions as we close this are about government purposes. Consider updating technology interfaces on an annual and continuing basis. It turns out we don't necessarily do that as well as we should. To develop stronger demographic population trend analysis, to have greater publication and communication of census data and census-related data, and finally, a more vigorous debate across society about the purposes of government. This is my picture. This has been my presentation. I welcome discussion and debate. Thank you for your attention on this day after Thanksgiving, but we can always be thankful for what we do have and the opportunity to have these discussions. And
Thank
welcome to
you.
questions and discussions, and I return you to your broadcast announcer, Ron Lantanian.
Okay. Vincent, thank you. Thank you very much. I
Stop sharing.
let's we can eliminate the
What?
screen share and just go back to our crew for question and answer. And I want to just begin with my
Sorry, typo.
takeaway from your conversation is that there are two really important points. One involves the discussion of Horace Mann, and if I recall what you had said, his position was that education is central to a good government. I think that's what you said. And when I think about that, when I think about where we are today in our information age, with the internet, with the web, with the evolution of artificial intelligence, my concern is that those three vehicles, despite the potential utility that they offer us all, my concern is that they are serving to blur our educational process, and that I think students are being diminished by this technology, which seems a very unfortunate consequence of what should otherwise be a useful addition to our culture. I think it needs to be adjusted. It needs to be corrected. We need guardrails and regulations, which you've talked about. That's the first point. And the second is that I think we need another Francis Perkins. Francis Perkins had an enormous impact on the evolution of our cultural and societal norms today. And there's nobody like Francis Perkins in our on the radar screen at this moment. So, Vincent, I'd like your take on this. Those are my two takeaways. Horace Mann and his vision of the importance of education in terms of government, and Francis Perkins as a person who could lead the nation in terms of the New Deal and maybe let's say a contemporary deal because we need something in this country. What are your thoughts?
Well, I will reverse the order there because I think we actually have a potentially and already somewhat inspirational figure who is an American that would not have been expected, and that is Pope Leo XIV.
Oh,
He took his name specifically to remember Pope Leo XIII, who wrote a document, Rerum Novarum, on the
yeah.
condition of working people and families and the need for respect. And he referenced his taking office as a point to recognize this new industrial revolution of the internet, more specifically artificial intelligence. And as an American who's bicultural, also holds a Peruvian passport as well now,
Mm.
an interesting figure in this debate. and has very already specifically specified how American bishops should think about the voices of the immigrant, not simply their own authority, which is kind of an interesting small d democratic thing to say to bishops who have authority in their diocese that they need to listen to other people who are in the pews or on the streets is a pretty direct thing for a pope to say. His fellow bishops need to listen to others, not just themselves or him. It's pretty direct. It's led to statements from the bishops about immigration that people may or may not agree with, but is an interesting kind of change of wind a little bit, and a throwback as well, perhaps, to the reform mentality. More generally, education and teachers struggle with technology, but many of the contract negotiations of recent years have specified that they needed more time for lesson preparation, specifically for lesson preparation, because lessons are more complicated today, whether it's history covering 2 centuries of U.S. history or technology in terms of computers or the usage or expansion in Massachusetts, certainly vocational education. These are all issues that educators can have an opportunity to influence. And you see the unions, despite their flaws, really pushing back and saying, we need more time, we need more education. It speaks to the fact that Horace Mann saw the education of teachers as professionals, as something really to be specified and honored. And I think in that sense, good teachers are as much a professional as a good doctor or a good lawyer, leaving out those who are not good.
Yeah, I take your point. I think you've got a really good point on Pope Leo. He is a sort of a iconoclast in a sense. He has an unusual capacity, it seems, for understanding current technology and its importance in terms of our culture. But I have a question. First of all, he is the Pope of a single religion, and there are many religions on this planet. Is that going to be a problem? And then secondly, we have this sort of principle in the United States of a separation between church and state. So would he be able, as a cleric, to be able to have the influence of someone like a Francis Perkins? What's your thought? And then,
Well,
and,
there's
and then I'm going to turn to Tom Hubbard, our theologian, for a response. But Vincent, your response first.
there's a couple bits to that. Remember that Francis Perkins was a successful secular activist while being personally religious. And she often, without publicity, went to a monastery in Catonsville, Maryland on weekends to pray, to think, to go on retreat. She was involved in something, well, it's the Episcopal Church Pension Fund that made it possible for clergy to have some resources as they retired. Think about the hybridization there of secular financial mechanisms with religion in a way that became inspirational when she took that to a purely secular context. Uh, the Pope certainly, has to be careful in the American context. But ultimately, if we are informed by religious values, that we recognize the distinction between what a particular religion might require and what we might see as an opportunity to help our fellow person, mothers, men, children, others with hazards or problems. It makes of the American experience a hybrid.
Yeah,
That's very important in terms of that.
yeah, I agree. Tom, what are your thoughts? What's your reaction?
I think our basic hope should be that Pope Leo's thinking could inspire another Francis Perkins,
Yeah,
that his voice cannot be so prominent with the influence needed because of his position
yeah, yeah, yeah,
as head of an institution with limited democratic
yeah,
character.
yeah, yeah. I I see some hands, so let's go to Avi. Avi, your hand was up. There you go.
Yeah, let me first apologize. I don't know what's wrong with the camera. I'm not deliberately looking like a cloud here, but
Oh,
anyway, first comment, Vince, I really enjoyed the presentation. It sort of it gave us a chance to step back and get some context for the world from the perspective of all the history that you brought in, and it I think is very useful. Sometimes we forget the forest and trees problem. The second is a quote. I'm not sure I'll get it right. I think it was John Adams who was the first president to live in the White House. And when he entered it, I think he said words to the effect, "May none but wise men live in this great house." And it struck me that that has not always been fulfilled in terms of the presidents. The question I have is, I suppose, a little bit springboarding off what Ron said. My concern is that the government is in education, and we see some of the problems there. The government controls it, and you end up with a diminution of certain values and the emphasis of others. There's a reason why socialism now is highly regarded by the young people, led to the mayoral result in New York. And for the first time, more young people say they prefer socialism to capitalism. I see that as a problem. And I wonder whether we are really better served by having government control education, what we call public education, or are we better off having a more diverse and private system, with the result being that there would be different points of view and less centralized control of education?
Avi, just one question. I mean, I wonder, is it when you make the comment that government controls education? I think if you look at federal funding for education in the United States, it's a very, very small fraction of the total. Are you thinking that states control state funding or state school boards, or what is your thought there? I'm
My thinking is that we have a public school system in the country,
Yeah,
and therefore it is controlled by government, and maybe a lower authority than the federal government. Is argument now about disbanding the Department of Education.
yeah,
But it's public in the sense that it's controlled maybe at the municipal level, the state level. All of them have tentacles in it. And I
yeah,
wonder, once you make this a public function, by requirement is going to be a political function. It will be influenced by those who have political power and by those who seek political power. And I
yeah.
wonder, I mean, Vince was homeschooled, but I wonder if we would be better off. It's a very different model and one that would not be enthusiastically received at first. But if you had the diversity in education and in the structure of education that we applaud in the private sector, say in economics, different innovations, different ideas, and those that are good would flourish and those not, like to think, would recede. But
Uh,
that's what I had in mind, that it would be taken away from the centralized authority.
Vincent, what's your thought on Avi's comment?
Well, he touches, thank you for the appreciation of what I was trying to do, which is to look at the broader aspect. We do have government regulation of education in Massachusetts and in most states, because each state is really more like a country. That has its pluses and minuses. There is the opportunity for religious and private education in many ways as well. That's important. And there are constant struggles between various religious and secular views. Um, I think an interesting measure of that I've experienced is when I was growing up, my parents asked me to read the Encyclopedia profile on Madame Montessori, which was banned in most public schools. Today, there are examples such as the Longfellow School in Cambridge, which proudly boasts with a banner outside that they're accredited by the American Montessori authorities.
Yeah.
Now, an effective, proven method of education is, in fact, now in a public school. There's been a gradual push to bring back phonetics as opposed to look-say. Look-say works for some words, but not for everything, and phonetics is more fundamentally successful. It's always going to be a little bit chaotic. The tuition tax voucher proposal has some interesting aspects to it, but it involves the transfer of public funds to private agencies or churches, which actually creates some additional problems there. I've asked people, wouldn't it be simpler to have a tuition tax waiver if you're educating your child by other means, that portion that you would consume with your student in the public school would be waived. And curiously, most people on the left and in the right said, no, it has to be a tuition voucher or nothing. So there's a little bit of a revelation of a kind of authoritarianism in that. Ultimately, you have to come back to what are the technical skills that a laboring working class person needs to know. What are the technical skills that somebody going to college should have, not just philosophy and critical thinking and analysis, but the things that are needed to actually succeed and import new information. They used to talk about the liberal terminal arts degree. I don't think that's functional anymore. What you want to do is to educate people with critical analysis and skills so that for the next 20 or 30 or 50 years, as lifespan lengthens, people can import new information, analyze it carefully, and integrate it to a successful life. And that's always a struggle, but that's where philosophy of education comes through and the need to talk about it openly and honestly.
Well, let me add, if I could, add one point that came to mind. There's an example of the inequity, Ron, I'm referring to. People who want to send their children, say, to a religious school or a private school have to, in addition to the support there, have to pay taxes for the public school, even though they're not using the public school system. And so you end up with a double taxation for people who want to opt out of this public school because the public school may not be doing a very good job. So that's an example of what I meant by it. Makes sense.
I agree with you exactly. That's where I said it would be simpler to have a tuition
Yes,
waiver
right.
if your child is consuming educational dollars for that period of time. It would be less harsh on public budgets. It would be more fair to individuals who are expending their own resources rather than. So
And you said
there
that
are
both people,
public services that we actually don't always go to the government for. AAA is actually provided an alternative for doing your registration for cars or licenses. And I don't know exactly what the mix is, but it's meant that people can go to a private entity to accomplish a public purpose while the registry still provides their services as well. And I think that's sort of the wisdom of the hybrid system that the United States has by state or by federal.
it's noteworthy, Vince, when you said about the tuition waiver, that both people on the left and the right disagreed with it.
Interesting. That suggests, I think, for at least some of them, a bit of totalitarianism
That's
underneath
right.
that they may not realize.
Right.
We have two more hands up and it's 12 o'clock, so keeping our eye on the time. Let's go to Eddie, and Tom, you'll have the last word, but Eddie first.
Wow, what a complex world. And Americans seem to love to make it even more complex. I hate to say it.
That's all right.
I come from an educational system in the UK. It is government run, and it has produced some very good educational quality. And I'm a product of that particular process. I'd never have gone to university if it hadn't been for the grants that local municipalities and the government provided. I never would have been able to do it. But so there are places for government and there are places for private, but there has to be at least a minimal level of education that has to be applied across the country. And I don't see that being done individually. You need mathematics, you need writing, you need all the critical thinking skills. And I hate to say it, but Americans seem to make their educational system too prone to political processes. I don't know how you stop that, but that is an extremely critical point. I think Winston Churchill says Americans seem to try everything and until they come to a point at which they finally figure it out. But I'm paraphrasing him, perhaps. But
Yeah.
the complexity and mess, and the thing I fear about private education is that there are many places where it can go off the rails, and I've seen it happen. In Quebec is a good example of the Hasidim, whose schools the kids hardly know how to even add two and two. So this is a problem, and the Quebec government let them do it because they got their votes. So it was a political deal that they had, and so it becomes a politicization process as well, even when you try to go private. So I don't know. I don't have answers. I just see complexity, and maybe Vincent has a clearer picture of it. But
Yeah.
what can I say?
What's your what's your reaction to Eddie's comment?
Briefly, along the way in trying to understand many aspects, I've occasionally gone back to the periodic table of elements. Life, too bad we don't have a simple way for a periodic table of elements for the humanities. But if you look at the halogens and their dynamic, or when you look at the atomic weights, you see that certain elements are more likely to combine with others, but under strange physics might. There's an incredible dynamic. If you think about the periodic table of elements, humanities have that without having had a good descriptor of it. So the opportunity to recognize chaos, to recognize good and bad models, that's where critical thinking and analysis are important, where science ultimately, Albert Einstein said, maybe I had to do with the development of the weapon, but it should be other people with other values who make the decisions. And that's a respect and a humility that not all humanities or scientific people have.
I love the analog between the periodic table and humanity, Vincent. I think that's a clever
Yeah.
one. I like that a lot. Let's go to Tom. Tom, you have a distinct role in our group, given your history as a theologian and otherwise. And I think there's been a lot of discussion today about the interface between church and state, and I'd like your comments. I know you have your hand up, so you're thinking about something else, but I'd like your comment on the latter as well. You're muted, Tom. There you go.
It's a rather broad subject. I'm. It's loaded with feelings by many people.
Yeah.
Uh, I'm I'm almost hesitant to enter that huge field at this late part of our discussion.
That's fair enough. I'll buy that. Okay.
Uh, in the interest of time, I'd just like to articulate a frustration I have with our national conversation about political and governmental issues. We have to me, what is an unclarity in the use of terms, specifically the term socialism. It is a broad term in our culture that covers Marxism and democratic socialism that we find in Europe, but we have no clear way of distinguishing the two in our national conversation. And when I arrived in Jamaica to teach there in the theological college for all the mainline churches, the head of our denomination, the bishop, took me aside and talked about Fabian socialism. I had not heard the term before, but the Fabian Society in Great Britain recommended a gradual kind of socialism, not a revolutionary kind. And this society became one of the founding members of the labor movement and the Labor Party. And Fabius was a Roman general whose military tactics were to tire out the opposition by delaying attacks and taking delaying tactics over time. I just so wish we could find better terms to talk about socialism so that every socialist could not be marked with the communist word.
Yeah.
It's just a frustration I wanted to share with you at the very end of our discussion today.
Yeah, and I would second that because I find Americans have no concept of what real socialism is. And it's very different to what I think is broadcast around the United States. It seems to be synonymous with communism. It is not.
I appreciate that comment. That's very insightful, and when I think about
Bernie Sanders.
word delay in terms of current events, that's become a staple in the White House, has it not? In terms of accomplishing the president's agenda, to delay the courts, to delay decisions, and then move by distracting other. I don't know. Maybe we're getting too political here for the moment, but Tom,
I would say, actually, Ron, just one thing. To me, Trump is a great communist. More a communist than any president that has ever existed.
well, that will make for a very interesting.
That's my sense of it.
I could see that if we don't stop now, we're going to go for another hour or two. I want to thank all of you for being part of this today. I know it's the day after Thanksgiving. I know you have lots of family events going on, but I do thank you. I think that this discussion has been on the same level as any discussion we've ever had for a presentation. And Vincent, I want to thank you for what I think will be regarded as a landmark statement today. I really mean that. I think today you've given us a sense of direction that I hope everybody in Winchester and other people beyond Winchester will begin to listen to and respect, because I think what you've said is very important. So, Vincent, yeah, you have a lot of applause from all of us today. I thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ron, and thank you, everyone. I agree the discussion has been at a high level. This has always been a remarkably insightful group. And any additional inputs that people want to provide, this is a presentation that I will continue to work on and perhaps turn into some type of publication or book, because those 30 or 40 years of people not having civics is a gap that is important to the content. Brief reference to the last comment is Americans often do kind of ignore or use sharp words on each other because we are people of action. Not enough of us, myself included, sit around with some sherry at afternoon tea at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to really think about where we might be going. We say, what are we doing at 4:30 this afternoon? Or when do I pick up my child from what program? So there's both opportunity and risk with that. And thank you, and happy Thanksgiving season to everyone.
Right. That's a very wonderful note to end on. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their weekend. Thank you very much. We'll get together again on December 12th when we're going to talk about autonomous vehicles. So,
Oh,
lots of thanks, folks. Have a good weekend. Take care.
Thank you.
bye.
Thanks, Vincent.